Scary, deep woods stories, the screams beneath Ravenbrook Sanatorium. It began on a storm-choked night when Claire Morton, a psychiatric nurse turned investigative podcaster, returned to the forgotten mountain town of Winden Ridge, Colorado, the place where she was born, but had fled from at 16. Her reason for returning wasn't nostalgia. It was the viral news of three hikers who had vanished without a trace near the decaying ruins of Ravenbrook Sanatorium, an asylum long shut down and believed to be cursed. The town had buried its stories along with the patients who had died there. But Claire wasn't one to let things stay buried, especially when one of the missing hikers was her cousin, Ellie. Armed with recording equipment, an EMF detector, and a history soaked in childhood trauma, Claire drove her dusty Subaru up the winding forest road that led to the perimeter of the hospital. Trees leaned over the path like spectators to a funeral procession, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The hospital emerged through the mist like a corpse breaching the soil, massive, broken, 100 windows like dead eyes. The gates were rusted open, and a crude wooden sign spray-painted with the words, "Do not enter," creaked in the wind. Ignoring the town's warnings and her own trembling gut, Claire stepped over the threshold. The moment her foot crossed onto the hospital grounds, her recorder spiked with static. The air changed, heavier, colder, filled with something that made the hairs on her arms lift. She pressed record. The lobby, once grand, was now a shattered relic. Tiles were cracked like broken teeth, and vines slithered up the walls. There was a smell, mold, rust, and something else, something sour. Claire moved cautiously, her flashlight sweeping over crumbling murals and the remnants of wheelchairs, restraints, and overturned gurneys. Her EMF reader blinked to life. That's when the first scream hit her ears, not from a patient, but from her recorder. Static twisted into a guttural wail that shouldn't have been there. The sound vanished the moment she pulled her headphones away. Breathing hard, Claire pressed on, descending into the West Wing, where the most violent patients had been housed. Her cousin's journal had hinted at an interest in the asylum's rumored underground levels not listed on any blueprint. In the west corridor, beneath a fallen exit sign, Claire found a collapsed section of wall. Behind it, a stairwell plunged into darkness. She hesitated, staring into the void, and then the flashlight flickered. In the brief second of darkness, she saw a silhouette standing at the top of the stairs with her. When the light returned, it was gone. Heart pounding, Claire descended. Each step echoed like gunfire. Down there, time seemed to bleed. Her phone had no signal, the EMF meter was screeching, and the further she went, the colder it got. At the bottom was a hallway with reinforced doors, each marked with peeling numbers and strange, archaic symbols she couldn't decipher. She recorded everything, whispering her notes into the mic, hands shaking. The first door she opened led to a room covered in childlike drawings, faces with mouths sewn shut, eyes gouged out, scrawled phrases like, "They still sing, and she feeds them." Her breath misted in front of her. Then came the music, a music box, playing slowly from somewhere behind the walls. Claire turned to leave and found the door had shut behind her. The handle wouldn't budge. Panic surged. She banged on the door, yelling. That's when the whispering started, soft, rhythmic, just outside her field of hearing. She turned and saw the shadows in the corner stretch. From them, something emerged, a pale figure with hollow sockets and no lips. It floated inches above the ground, dressed in a patient gown, the number 117 etched into its chest. Claire screamed, and as it rushed her, her flashlight shattered. Everything went black. But her recorder, it was still rolling. The only sound was her breath, ragged and fast, as she clawed through her bag for a backup light. Her fingers closed around the tiny pen light she kept on her keychain. It flickered to life, casting a feeble glow that barely touched the room. The figure was gone, but the walls pulsed like a living thing. Claire backed away, clutching her recorder. The music box had stopped, but its haunting melody still echoed in her mind. She yanked the door handle again, and this time, it creaked open. The hallway outside was pitch black. Her EMF reader buzzed louder. Claire stepped into the corridor, the walls seeming to close in as the floor dipped slightly, like she was descending deeper underground, even though she hadn't taken another stair. She passed more doors, each with increasingly grotesque symbols. One had what looked like a crucifix made of teeth nailed to it. Another was scratched raw by what must have been fingernails. A low, wet sound came from behind one of the doors, a kind of gurgling sob. She didn't stop to check. The hallway finally ended at a rusted elevator. Its metal gate bent outward like something had escaped. Beside it, a stairwell spiraled down. She descended, drawn by a strange compulsion, her heart pounding against her ribs like a warning. At the bottom, she found another hallway, but this one was different. It was pristine. Clean white tiles, polished walls, bright surgical lighting humming overhead. It was as if she had stepped into another time. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally as though the sound bounced back faster than it should. She checked her recorder, still rolling. The air smelled of antiseptic and flowers, lilacs. She recognized it instantly. It was the scent her mother used to wear before she died in this very hospital. Her throat tightened. Down the hall, she saw a figure walking away from her, a woman in a nurse's uniform, gliding without sound. "Mom?" Claire whispered, then louder. "Mom?" The figure didn't turn. Claire ran after her, but the corridor seemed to stretch, elongate. The closer she got, the further away the nurse became. Then the light snapped off. Total darkness. Her pen light flicked and died. Claire stood still, too scared to move, her breath fogging the air. Then, a whisper. "Claire, why did you leave me?" It was her mother's voice. Cold fingers brushed her cheek. She screamed, turning in circles, trying to find the source. Her recorder captured everything. The scream, the voice, the low growl that followed. The lights snapped on again. Claire stood alone in the hall. The nurse was gone, but the scent of lilacs lingered. At the end of the corridor, a door marked Sub-Level 3 began to creak open, slowly as if inviting her in. The explosion of glass tore through the air like a gunshot, fragments raining down on Claire as she threw her arms up to shield her face. But no cuts followed, no blood. She looked down. The shards had vanished before they touched her skin. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each one more ragged than the last. She gripped her recorder like a lifeline, speaking into it with a cracked voice. Day 1, I think. Underground. No sense of time. Something's here. Watching. Maybe listening. A sudden vibration traveled up her spine. The floor beneath her trembled, not like an earthquake but a pulse, as if the building had a heartbeat. Claire stumbled backward, colliding with the door, but it no longer existed. It was now a wall. She turned to find the rest of the room had shifted. The records were gone. The mirrors gone. It was just 4 blank concrete walls, no exits. Then came the thumping, slow, methodical, from the other side. Something was walking along the hallway she'd come from, heavy and wet, each step leaving a dragging sound. Claire pressed her ear against the wall. A voice came through. "Still hungry," it hissed. Her eyes darted to the corners of the room. A vent near the ceiling, too small for comfort, but big enough to crawl through. She hauled a broken chair into position, climbed atop it, and began to squeeze inside. The air inside the vent was nauseating, decay and iron, and the further she crawled, the more she saw etchings carved into the metal. Scratches forming names, hundreds of names. Some she recognized from patient files, some she didn't. Her hand brushed something warm. She looked down. A handprint. Fresh. She kept crawling. After minutes or hours, she emerged into a surgical theater. Tiered rows of broken seats surrounded a gurney, bathed in a single flickering light. Tools were scattered across the floor. Bone saws, clamps, jars filled with grayish fluid. On the far wall, someone had written in blood, "You are the final subject." Claire barely had time to process the words before a loudspeaker crackled to life. "Welcome back, Madeline," a voice rasped. "Shall we begin?" The doors to the theater slammed shut. Something heavy dropped onto the gurney behind her. Slowly it began to rise. She turned, and what she saw was not human. Claire spun around as the pipe organ groaned to life, its notes discordant, trembling with age and something far more unnatural. Dust cascaded from the rafters with every haunting chord, and the pews seemed to groan in response, as though reacting to the melody. The door behind her slammed shut with a thunderous clang. She ran to it, pulling, pounding, locked. The EMF reader crackled violently, glowing an angry red. The temperature dropped further, her breath forming thick clouds. Then the voice came, not from the walls or the shadows, but from the recorder strapped to her chest. "Claire," it hissed. "She's hungry." Claire backed away, pressing herself against the mural. The painted eyes of patient 117 seemed to shimmer with wetness, as though they had blinked. The music swelled. Something moved at the far end of the chapel, a silhouette emerging slowly from the altar's broken stones. It was the same figure as before, pale, mouthless, floating just inches above the ground. Only now it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from behind the pews, slithering from the shadows, translucent patients in hospital gowns, each one twisted by the pain of their final moments. Some missing limbs, others with bandaged heads and stitched mouths. Claire clutched her recorder tightly. "What do you want from me?" she cried, her voice trembling. The answer came in overlapping whispers, each voice layered with a hollow echo. To remember, to feed, to scream. Her knees buckled under the psychic weight of their words. The chapel lights flickered violently, then burst in showers of sparks. Total darkness fell, until the mural behind her began to glow. Light pulsed from the figure's stitched lips, a crimson that washed the room in a blood-hued veil. The ghostly congregation turned as one toward the mural and began to chant in a guttural, throaty language Claire didn't understand. It felt wrong, like hearing something that scraped the back of your brain. Then the center of the mural cracked. The wall itself split open vertically, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into an even deeper part of the sanatorium. The figures stopped chanting and turned their hollow gazes toward Claire. One pointed at the stairwell. Her feet moved on their own, downward. The air thickened and the darkness grew oily, pressing in around her. As she descended, the sound of the organ faded, replaced by a soft, rhythmic humming, like a lullaby, slow and mournful. At the bottom was a room that didn't belong in a hospital. It looked like a ritual chamber. Candles in rusted holders lined the circular stone walls, and the floor bore a massive symbol carved deep into the cement. A sigil composed of jagged lines, interlocking circles, and the number 117 repeated over and over again. At the center sat a single object, a wooden high chair, old and splintered with rusted restraints. On the wall behind it were photos, hundreds of them, clipped to strings that crisscrossed like spiderwebs. Each photo was of a patient, before and after treatment. Many of the after photos were redacted or burnt, but Claire recognized one. Ellie. She had been here. She had found this place. As Claire stepped forward, her recorder buzzed again. A new voice spoke, not a whisper, a child's voice. "She's in the wires now." Claire's hand shook as she lifted the recorder. "Who's speaking?" she asked. "The one who lives between the walls. She sings to the dead. She brought them back." The voice faded and the air shimmered. A loud crack split the silence, and the photos on the wall began to curl and blacken, as though licked by invisible flames. The high chair creaked. Something sat in it now. Claire turned slowly. It was the girl, patient 117. Her body emaciated, her skin paper white, eyes bottomless voids. Her mouth had been sewn shut, but still she hummed the lullaby. The threads bulged with every note, as though something inside her wanted to get out. Claire couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The girl tilted her head, and then the humming stopped. "Do you remember what they did to me?" she asked, her voice inside Claire's mind. Claire stumbled back, colliding with the wall. "I don't know what happened to you," she whispered, "but I want to understand. I want to help you." The girl smiled. It was the most horrifying thing Claire had ever seen. "Then let me show you." In a flash, Claire's vision blurred. The chamber dissolved, and suddenly she stood in a pristine hospital hallway, bright and clean, nurses and doctors moving about with purpose. Ravenbrook, years ago. The past. She was witnessing it. No, she was inside it. She saw children lined up outside a room marked Therapy Wing C heard their nervous chatter. Inside the room, a man in a doctor's coat was preparing something. Claire drifted closer. On the table was a medical file. Patient 117. Real name, Annalise Wren. Diagnosis, uncontrollable vocalization. Treatment, electroconvulsive silence therapy. Claire watched in horror as the man placed a metal device into a young girl's mouth, locking her to the table. The girl screamed, not from fear, from pain. Her voice cracked the light bulbs. The staff flinched, holding her down. The doctor activated the machine. Claire tried to scream to stop them, but she was invisible, a ghost to the ghosts of the past. The girl's screams turned into pure energy, surging through the hospital's electrical system. Lights blew, equipment sparked, then blackout. When the lights returned, the girl was silent. Her lips had been sewn shut. Her eyes, wide and bleeding, stared into Claire's soul. They said I was dangerous, she whispered inside Claire's mind. But they were the monsters. And then, snap. Claire was back in the chamber. The candles had all gone out. The girl was gone. In her place, only the high chair remained, now tipped over. The air felt different, emptier, calmer. Claire dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. A low rumble began in the walls. Then came the siren. An old emergency alarm blared through the facility, warping from years of disuse. A voice crackled over a distant intercom. Containment breach. Ward C. Evacuate. Repeat. Evacuate. Something had been unleashed. Claire ran. Through hallways that pulsed with unnatural light. Past doors that opened on their own. The spirits were no longer hiding. They screamed and wailed, clawing at the air, pouring through vents and crawling across ceilings. Claire burst into the main lobby, her chest heaving. The front door was open. Daylight. Actual daylight. But standing in the doorway was Ellie. Her eyes were hollow, her expression blank. You brought her back, she said. Now she wants more. And behind Ellie, the shadow of patient 117 loomed, smiling with a mouth that was no longer stitched, just open, and singing. Claire's scream echoed through the lobby, but Ellie didn't flinch. Her eyes were glazed, lifeless, as if whatever made her Ellie had been hollowed out and replaced. Behind her, the spectral figure of patient 117 hovered in the doorway, the faint outline of stitches still visible around her mouth, though they no longer held. Her lips parted, and the lullaby resumed, slow and crawling, vibrating through the floor into Claire's bones. Claire stumbled back, her body trembling, her recorder crackling with static. The entity's presence was overwhelming now, not just a ghost, but a force of nature, ancient and furious. All around her, the walls of the sanatorium seemed to pulse, as though the building itself were alive, infected by the spirit that now ruled it. Ellie took a step forward. She showed me, she whispered, everything they did to her, to all of them. They used us, fed off our pain. She was the first, she was the loudest, and now she wants everyone to hear. Claire tried to move, but the air had thickened into molasses. Her limbs were heavy, her thoughts muddled. The entity wasn't just haunting the place, it was consuming it, bending reality around itself. Claire reached into her jacket, fumbling for her phone. No signal. The screen glitched, displaying a single word before going black. Listen. A sudden gust of wind slammed the front door shut, and the window shattered inward, shards floating midair before rearranging themselves into mirrored panels. Each one reflected not Claire, but scenes of the past, tortured patients, brutal treatments, doctors smiling as they administered agony. Claire turned in a slow circle, surrounded by the horror that had been hidden for decades. The ghost of patient 117 floated forward, her eyes fixed on Claire. She didn't move like a person, but like smoke pulled by unseen currents. Her voice crawled into Claire's skull. Your voice is strong. You tell stories. Help me tell mine. Claire shook her head. You're hurting people. You already have Ellie. What more do you want? The girl's smile was haunting. The world forgot us. We were erased. I want them to remember. I want them to scream. Ellie reached out and grabbed Claire's wrist. The contact was ice. Visions surged through Claire's mind, not just of Ravenbrook, but of other places, other institutions, other children silenced and buried in darkness. Thousands of stories, all screaming to be heard. Claire wrenched free, gasping, "I can't carry that. No one can." Patient 117 leaned close, her breath like winter. "Then you'll join us." The floor cracked. From beneath the tiles, pale arms reached upward, grasping, clawing. Dozens of ghostly patients began to rise, surrounding Claire. The EMF reader exploded in sparks. Claire turned, dodging grasping fingers, bolting toward the east wing, deeper into the facility. She ran through corridors now shifting, rearranging behind her. The sanatorium was alive, trying to trap her. Whispers flooded her ears. Names, ages, treatments, deaths. An archive of pain etched into every brick. Finally, she burst into what had once been the records room. Dusty cabinets lined the walls. She dove toward the central desk and began yanking drawers open. Files spilled out. Patient histories yellowed with time. She found Annalise Wren, patient 117. Flipping through the pages, Claire read aloud. Admitted at age 7, diagnosed with glossolalia. Symptoms include uncontrollable speaking in unknown languages, high-frequency vocalizations. Claire froze. Sound phenomena reported during treatments. Staff injuries, equipment malfunctions. She turned the page. Last recorded session resulted in facility-wide power outage. Patient declared deceased, body unrecovered. Claire whispered, "They never buried her." She never left. From the shadows, the ghost of Annalise appeared. "They put me in the walls." Claire dropped the file. "Then we have to get you out." The ghost's expression changed. Surprise, confusion, hope. Claire backed toward the wall behind the file cabinets, noticing a seam in the bricks. A hidden door. She pushed. It opened to reveal a narrow space between the walls, filled with wires, broken glass, and at its center, a sealed sarcophagus. Medical restraints bolted it shut. Claire moved toward it, but the ground quaked. The ghost shrieked, not in rage, in fear. "She's coming!" Ellie cried from behind, staggering into the room. "The real one!" The air split with a deafening roar. From the ceiling, a second figure descended. Not the girl, a creature, black as coal, burning from within, stitched together from every voice it had stolen. It shrieked with the combined fury of 100 spirits. Claire turned back to the sarcophagus. "If I set her free, will she stop it?" Ellie nodded. She was the first voice, the loudest. Only she can silence it. Claire began tearing at the bolts. The ghost of Annalise joined her, phasing through the restraints, pressing her hands against the metal. With a pulse of energy, it cracked open. Inside lay a withered body, perfectly preserved. Annalise's body. Her eyes opened. White fire poured from them. The wall shook. The shadow creature screamed. Annalise rose. No longer a ghost, something more. A force of memory, of justice. She faced the creature and sang, not a lullaby, a siren's call of pain, truth, and release. The creature writhed, imploded, and vanished in a burst of light. The sanatorium fell silent. Claire awoke in the grass outside Ravenbrook, the sun rising. Ellie beside her. The building behind them was crumbling, imploding into itself. Dust carried off on the wind. From her recorder came one final whisper. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she staggered backwards from the mirror, now splintered with cracks that bled a black ichor. The distorted reflection of herself grinned at her with an expression her real face wasn't making. And then, slowly, it faded until the mirror showed only darkness. Trembling, she turned and continued deeper into the sanatorium's forbidden subterranean wing, where the very walls seemed to pulse with a grotesque heartbeat. Her recorder hissed and clicked, the static now forming intermittent patterns, almost like Morse code. Each footstep echoed with unnatural delay, as if time were stretching around her. She passed empty patient cells, each door slightly ajar, each space colder than the last. The graffiti inside grew more deranged. Twisted diagrams, childlike scrawls of people on fire, and increasingly repeated phrases like, "Feed her memory," and "Light must die." Then from behind her came the dragging sound again, like raw flesh scraping against tile. Claire spun around, flashlight beam twitching, heart galloping. Nothing. But when she turned forward again, a figure blocked the hallway. It was the same girl from the drawings, the number 117 carved into her forehead, her eyes bleeding ink, her mouth sewn shut with surgical wire. Claire froze. The girl raised a hand and pointed. Down the hall, a door at the far end thudded. Once, twice, then silence. The girl vanished like mist dispersing in sunlight. Claire had no choice but to follow the direction she'd pointed. As she approached, she saw the door was made of heavy iron, reinforced with chains that had been broken from the inside. Above it, a tarnished plaque read, "Sub-Basement Alpha, Electroshock Records." The air here was worse, like breathing through a dirty rag soaked in rot. Inside, the room was lined with shelves of film reels and tape recordings. An old reel-to-reel projector sat in the corner, and beside it, an overturned gurney stained with decades-old blood. Claire pushed a reel into the player and cranked the machine to life. The tape screeched, then a voice, calm, male, authoritative, began. Patient 117, refuses food, speaks in unknown language. Subject exhibits resistance to electroshock. Skin ruptures release black fluid. Appears not to feel pain. The voice faltered. She said she remembers. She sees what we do in our sleep. We burned her, but she came back different. The machine sparked and died, the smell of ozone filling the room. Claire backed away, her nerves fraying. A metal cabinet at the far end of the room burst open, papers spilling out, followed by a cloud of flies that buzzed unnaturally. From within, a human hand, desiccated and clawed, reached toward her before crumbling to dust. Claire ran, heart hammering, back into the hallway only to find it changed. The path she came through was gone, replaced by a narrow passage lined with flickering red bulbs. As she navigated the corridor, the EMF meter shrieked. Her flashlight flickered again, and in that moment, she saw dozens of pale figures lining the walls, their mouths moving in silence. One stepped forward, a man with a surgeon's mask, holding a rusted bone saw. He raised his hand, and the lights went out completely. Claire screamed and stumbled backward, only to fall through a hidden panel into a chute that dumped her into another level entirely. She landed hard, pain flaring through her ribs. The darkness here was complete, but something moved around her, breathing, scraping, whispering. She pulled out her backup flashlight, switched it on, and found herself surrounded by patient beds, each with a leather restraint snapped or shredded. Every bed was occupied by corpses, and every corpse had their mouth sewn shut with the same silver thread, except one. In the far corner, a figure sat upright, staring directly at her. It smiled. Then it spoke. "Claire, we've been waiting." Claire stumbled forward in the total darkness, her hands sweeping blindly in front of her, until they met with cold, wet stone. The air in the passage had thickened into something viscous, like a fog made of oil. The music box was no longer playing, replaced by a deep thudding sound, rhythmic and low, like a heartbeat coming from the walls themselves. Her recorder hissed with static, the EMF reader in her pocket vibrating wildly. She kept whispering her thoughts, trying to stay grounded, but her own voice felt foreign. Every step deeper seemed to warp her sense of time. Shadows bled from the walls and danced across surfaces where no light shone. She reached another door. This one newer than the rest, reinforced metal with a slit window. Inside, she glimpsed a padded room, pristine in contrast to the decay elsewhere. A single metal chair sat in the center, its straps fastened tight. On the far wall, the words, "Welcome back," Claire, were written in blood-red streaks. Her breath caught. No one should know her name down here. The door creaked open by itself. She didn't want to step in, but her legs betrayed her. Inside, the lights flickered to life. Monitors in the walls sparked and glowed, displaying grainy black and white footage. Claire as a child in this very building, restrained, screaming, Nurses in old uniforms injecting her with something. Her memories fractured. She had never been a patient here. Had she? Then she heard it again. The lullaby, twisted, slow, rising from a vent above. Something dropped from it, landing with a wet slap. Claire turned and saw the same figure. Patient 117. But now its face was hers. A mocking grin stretched across its stitched mouth as it mimicked her movements. The walls began to pulse, the heartbeat growing louder. She ran, escaping into the hall, only to find herself in a corridor lined with mirrors. Each one reflected a different version of her, injured, older, decayed, or screaming. One stepped out. Claire's doppelganger grabbed her by the throat and whispered, "You're already dead. You just haven't stopped breathing yet." Then came the alarms, blaring red lights and klaxons echoing from above. A voice came over the intercom, distorted but familiar. "Subject Claire Morton has re-entered containment. Protocol 6-6-1 engaged." As the corridor tore apart around her, the mirrors shattering inward, Claire screamed. And then everything went quiet. Her eyes opened to darkness. She was strapped in the chair now. Her recorder, still rolling, captured one final phrase before it sparked out, her own voice saying, "Welcome back." Claire sprinted down the endless corridor, the stale air pressing in like a second skin, her lungs burning with each breath, the shrieks of unseen things chasing her into the darkness. She didn't dare look back, not even as she passed rooms whose doors now gaped wide, exhaling cold drafts that smelled of ammonia and rot. Each room pulsing with a sickly red light from nowhere. The static in her recorder crescendoed into a whine that made her teeth hurt, and somewhere ahead, a strobing light began to pulse in sync with the pounding in her skull. She burst into a wide operating theater, its observation seats empty, save for a single silhouette at the highest row, still as a mannequin. Claire's light flickered, her eyes refusing to focus on its form, as if the mind itself rejected its details. She stumbled to the center, where a surgical table stood with restraints cut and bloody. Her cousin's necklace lay there, unmistakable, silver with a cracked turquoise pendant. She reached for it, but the moment her fingers touched the chain, the room vibrated like a struck bell, and all the doors slammed shut with deafening force. A voice echoed, not spoken but poured directly into her thoughts. "She remembers." The air dropped in temperature again. Frost formed on the metal tools and the floor crackled with a thin sheet of ice. Behind her, something scraped against the wall, metal on tile, dragging with purpose. She turned slowly and saw a figure cloaked in a nurse's uniform, but its face was stitched shut, eyes covered by gauze, and in its hand was a bone saw slick with fresh gore. It didn't walk. It glided, and as it neared, Claire fell backward, her recorder falling from her hand and skidding across the floor. The voice came again, louder, shriller. "She won't forget." Claire rolled under the table, her breath hitching as the thing passed inches from her, its saw carving a lazy line into the metal. Her trembling fingers found the recorder, and the EMF spiked violently, casting waves of red light. From every shadow in the room, others began to emerge. Former staff, patients, malformed, their eyes glowing like embers, mouths sewn or stretched, reaching for her. In desperation, Claire pulled out a flare from her bag, struck it, and the bright flame forced the entities to recoil with hisses and shrieks. She bolted for a side door, ramming it open into a stairwell spiraling downward, the walls etched with claw marks. As she descended, a distant chant began to rise. Low and guttural, dozens of voices layering into a sound that felt ancient, wrong. The stairs ended at a sealed metal vault door with a small window fogged from inside. Behind it, someone, or something, moved. Claire stared in horror as a pale hand pressed against the glass, followed by a second, then a face she recognized. It was Ellie, or what was left of her. Her cousin's eyes were wide but hollow, and her mouth moved in a silent scream. Claire cried out, pounding on the door, but the chanting only grew louder until suddenly the walls cracked and began to bleed. That's when the alarms began to blare. Not mechanical, but organic, like wails of newborns layered over screams of the damned. Claire backed away, heart hammering, knowing the worst was still ahead, and that Ravenbrook had no intention of letting her leave. Claire's mind reeled as she clawed her way through the narrow crawl space, her hands raw and bleeding from jagged metal and crumbling concrete. She didn't remember finding the hatch or even crawling through it, only that she had to escape what she'd seen, what had whispered her name with a mouth that didn't exist. Behind her, the tunnel seemed to pulse with wet, organic sounds like breathing or feeding. Each time she stopped to catch her breath, the sounds grew louder. She emerged into a small chamber, barely lit by the cracked remnants of an old overhead bulb. The walls were lined with patient files, ancient, yellowed, their names redacted and their faces burned out. On the floor was a recorder, Ellie's. She snatched it up, heart hammering, and hit play. Ellie's voice came through, trembling, panicked, whispering about room 314, about a doctor named Herrick who continued his work long after the asylum shut down, turning patients into living conduits for something he called the hollow choir. Her final words were barely audible. "They wear your skin. Don't trust the mirrors." Claire looked around. There was a mirror in the corner, shattered in a spiderweb pattern. In its fractured reflection, Claire saw not herself, but her mother, standing behind her, mouth stitched shut, tears of blood streaming from her eyes. She spun, but the room was empty. Cold sweat dripped down her spine. The EMF reader pulsed in red. There was something near. Claire pocketed Ellie's recorder and bolted down the nearest hallway, walls warping as if reality itself were rejecting her presence. She passed cells filled with twitching shadows and heard a chorus of voices rising, dissonant and furious. Ahead, a door stood open. She entered and gasped. It was a surgical theater, preserved like a shrine. At its center, a mummified corpse in a doctor's coat stood propped upright, eyes replaced with black stones. Scrawled across the walls were hundreds of the same phrase, "The choir is hungry." Then something laughed. Not a voice, but the walls themselves. They rippled, pushing her forward into the room, sealing the door shut behind her. Claire spun, flashlight flickering wildly as the corpse began to twitch. With a hiss of escaping air, it turned its head toward her. The stones in its eyes pulsed like hearts. Claire raised her recorder and hit play, Ellie's warning flooding the air. The doctor screamed, a sound of thousands of voices layered into one, and the walls cracked, oozing blood. Claire dropped the device and ran, the door splintering as she forced it open. Behind her, the theater collapsed into shrieking chaos. She didn't stop. Through corridor after corridor, the asylum chased her, reshaping, roaring. She found herself in the main hall again. But something was wrong. The windows showed not night, but an endless void, stars spinning far too quickly. She wasn't in the hospital anymore. She was inside its memory, and it remembered her. Claire stumbled forward through the endless darkness, her hands scraping along cold, slick walls as she tried to regain her bearings. The broken remains of her flashlight hung from her wrist by its frayed strap, flickering dimly with each jolt of her trembling hand. The thing, patient 117, was no longer in the room, or if it was watching, waiting, hidden in a seam of shadow thick enough to drown her. She whispered into her recorder, more for herself than her listeners, her voice brittle, words shaking. Then she felt it, a breeze, faint but real, brushing her face. She followed it, inch by inch, her palms wet with fear. The corridor opened into what had once been a therapy auditorium, rows of broken seats cascading downward into a stage rimmed by torn red curtains. On the stage, mannequins in hospital gowns stood arranged in a semicircle, their heads replaced by rusted surgical tools, scalpels, bone saws, trephines. In the middle of them, seated in a cracked wheelchair, was a figure dressed in modern clothes. Claire rushed forward and recognized Ellie, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. Her cousin looked pale, her skin waxy and bruised. Claire touched her shoulder, and Ellie's eyes snapped open. "Don't let them hear you," she rasped. Then a sound shook the air, a high-pitched tone, like a feedback loop made of screams. The mannequins began to twitch. Claire grabbed Ellie and pulled her off the stage, navigating the maze of chairs as the mannequins lunged forward, their limbs jerking like puppets on broken strings. One of them sliced at Claire's arm, the blade whistling past her skin, drawing a thin line of blood. They reached a hallway and slammed the door shut, pressing their bodies against it as the figures pounded from the other side. Ellie gasped, tears in her eyes, and told Claire she had followed the voices during her hike. Voices promising truth, but they had lied. They were not voices of the dead, but echoes of something older, something beneath. Claire wrapped her cousin in her coat and tried to calm her. She needed to find a way out. But this place shifted. The map in her head no longer matched the corridors before her, and then the fire alarms went off. Not from fire, but something else. The scent of ash and rot filled the air, and from the sprinklers rained not water, but blood. Ellie screamed and they ran, slipping through crimson puddles, each footstep a sticky slap against the tile. The lights flickered, revealing flashes of a different era. Nurses in blood-stained uniforms, patients strapped to gurneys, doctors with faces distorted into grotesque smiles. Claire turned a corner and stopped. Before her stood the elevator from the original blueprints, one that had supposedly been sealed shut in 1957 after a patient mass suicide. But now it stood open, lights glowing. Ellie hesitated. Claire didn't. She pulled her cousin inside and the doors shut. The buttons were wrong. Instead of numbers, they were symbols. Claire pressed the one that looked like an open eye. The elevator dropped so fast their bodies lifted off the floor. It stopped with a jolt, and when the doors opened, they faced a new level. A morgue, perfectly preserved, yet filled with flickering screens playing footage from Claire's own podcast episodes. Someone or something had been watching, recording her, studying, and it was ready to respond. Claire's mind raced as she stumbled through the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Ravenbrook. The air was thick with a stench of decay, and the low moans echoed off the cold stone walls. She could feel unseen eyes watching her, shadows shifting just beyond her flashlight's beam. Suddenly the floor gave way beneath her, plunging her into freezing water. Gasping, she clawed her way out, soaked and shivering. Above her, ghostly faces pressed against the tunnel walls, mouths silently screaming. She scrambled forward, desperation driving her, until she burst through a rusted hatch into an abandoned greenhouse, bathed in moonlight. But safety was an illusion. From the foliage, pale hands reached out, dragging her back into darkness. Memories flooded her. The asylum's darkest experiments, the tortured souls left to rot, and the one secret that could either save her or condemn her forever. Her recorder, still rolling, captured every haunting sound as Claire prepared for the final confrontation, knowing she might never leave Ravenbrook alive. Claire's breath came in ragged gasps as she faced the source of the darkness. A figure cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing like dying embers. It spoke in a voice that sounded like the rustling of dead leaves, revealing the asylum's terrible truth. Ravenbrook wasn't just a prison for the insane, but a gateway between worlds, feeding on the souls trapped within. Claire realized the disappearances, the hauntings, even her cousin's fate were all part of this entity's hunger. Summoning every ounce of courage, she fought back, wielding her recorder's static like a weapon, disrupting the creature's form. The walls trembled, the air cracked with electric fury. With a final scream that echoed through the tunnels, the entity dissipated into nothingness. Exhausted but alive, Claire emerged from Ravenbrook as dawn broke, forever changed. Though the horrors had ended, the recorder still held the echoes of the screams beneath Ravenbrook Sanatorium, whispers that promised the darkness might one day return. Her story was just beginning.